So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ERTICO Academy Webinar. At the beginning, I would like to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in a couple of days to watch. I would like to invite all of you already to use the question box to write your question throughout the duration of the webinar, which we'll then use for questions to address them to our speakers. And I would like to begin our session today by quoting a good old saying that goes, actions speak louder than words. We could not really agree more. And for this reason, the topic of our webinar today is climate actions towards decarbonization of transport, with a specific focus on industry views. Perfect. My name is Alexandra Mai, and I'm a manager working at ERTICO. And for this webinar, we have invited 3 fantastic speakers whose everyday task is leading their companies on the path of sustainable mobility. And together we are going to discuss examples of actions taken by companies to address climate crisis, the Green Deal, and most likely already COVID-19 effects. This is the lineup for today. I hope you can see my slide with our brilliant speakers. I would like to first briefly introduce our panelists. Then I would give each and every one of them the floor to present their work and their companies. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session. And therefore, I would like to invite you to actively participate by including your questions in the question box. So today I have with us Angela Hultberg, who's Head of Sustainable Mobility at Inca Group, known as IKEA. We have with us Yvette Beth, who's the European Director of Strategy for Electric Vehicles at Enterprise Holdings, and Matthias Goldman, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at Sweco. And I would like to start our webinar today by shortly introducing to you ERTICO and our work. We are a multi-stakeholder public-private partnership, and we bring together over 100 partners from 8 different sectors. And our largest sector is very proudly public authorities, represented by cities, regions, and ministries. And our biggest strength is the diverse partnership that we have at ERTICO, and we work together on 4 different focus areas, those being connected and automated driving, clean mobility, which will be a strong focus for our discussion today, urban mobility, working closely and broadly with cities from our membership as well as outside of our partnership, and transport and logistics. As our activities, we work currently in 23 European projects and on 8 self-funded platforms. We also work on ITS congresses, both European and world, which are very familiar to all of you. And what is really important in our work is that through all our activities, we work with one common goal in mind, which is working towards decarbonization of transport. And as ERTICO, we have set an ambitious goal for ourselves to reduce 1 million tons of CO2 emissions from transport by 2030. And currently, we are working on a concrete plan to address this goal and achieve it through our work. And one of our horizontal activities, which we are very proud of, that was built on our 2 biggest strengths, which is our partnership and our expertise, is the ERTICO Academy, which brings different topics from the field of ITS in forms of thematic modules to those who are interested to learn. The modules are designed for public authorities in Europe and outside of it. And for this activity, we really hope to fill any knowledge gaps that there might be, and essentially to benefit from what ITS has to offer for all of us. And as ERTICO, we really believe that in order to achieve carbon neutrality, we all have to work together with our partnership with all different sectors, with different stakeholders, with different institutions. Therefore, this topic is particularly interesting and exciting for us today, and we really look forward to hear from our panelists on their contribution to this topic. And one of our activities that is bringing us closer to achieving this goal of reducing emissions is this on integration of electrification in urban environment, and specifically in 6 different European cities, 3 being Italian, 1 Spanish, 1 in Greece, 1 in Germany, just to give you an overview. And here we are talking about light category electric vehicles, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers, bringing them to the project partner cities for testing and focusing on assessing user behavior, user acceptance, paving the way for market deployment for this type of vehicles, and very importantly, raising the awareness of benefits of using such vehicles. Another of our exciting activities that we are part of is implementation of electrification in some bigger cities around the world. Here we are talking about bringing electrification as one of the solutions for decarbonization to cities such as, for instance, Hanoi or Kathmandu. In Hanoi, we can probably guess that the demand there is for electric scooters, while in Kathmandu, we are looking at electric rickshaws as well as electric buses. And together with local partners and national governments, as well as with other stakeholders, we are looking into models for sustainable implementation of these solutions. And not to take much more time from our speakers, I would like to give the floor to Yvette Beth, who is going to tell us about his work.
Okay, so can you... So hopefully you can see my screen now. Could somebody just let me know if you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Right, I'll start then. So good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be invited onto this webinar this afternoon. It's probably just as well you're seeing my screen at the moment, because after 8 weeks of working from home, my hair isn't quite what it used to be. So just a few notes about myself. So my name is Yvette Beth. I'm head of EV implementation for enterprise. I've had about 25 years working in sustainable mobility. The last 10 years with Transport for London, working on a number of connected and autonomous vehicle projects, electrification, a bunch of sustainable transport things ranging from demand responsive buses to e-bikes and e-scooters, and right through to working on drones and urban air mobility. For those of you who don't know where the UK is, it's a gap on the EU map these days. Apparently Ireland still sits on there, but it's just to the west of Sweden and Denmark and Germany. But it's quite amusing when we saw the latest EU map a couple of weeks ago and the UK disappeared from it. So yeah, another part of my background is I used to work for Boris Johnson. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you know, working 10 years in mobility in London, you certainly get used to the politics and things like that. I left TfL about 6 months ago, now working at Enterprise, and probably just worth giving a quick overview of who Enterprise are. I did have a meeting with a member of the City Council in Stockholm, whereas they did know who Transport for London was, they had no idea who Enterprise was. So for those of you who don't, this is just a little bit about Enterprise and what we do. So we're an international company, around about $26 billion of revenue last year, well over 100,000 employees around the globe, and 2 million vehicles on fleet around any one time. We are probably the largest mobility company in the world, and we're kind of global. From the UK perspective, it was about 1 billion revenue last year. We've got about 5,000 employees over 470 sites in the UK, and the slide shows about 100,000 vehicles. We've actually got about 130,000 on fleet at the moment. So kind of quite a large organisation. This next slide just sort of gives you an idea of the actual global reach. So pretty much covered all of Europe, as you might expect, North and South America, and an increasingly large presence in Asia as well. A family-owned business. It was founded in 1957. Slightly cheesy shot maybe, but that kind of shows our founder, Jack Taylor, his son Andy, and also Chrissy in the back seat there. So yeah, we've been going just over 60 years now, and Chrissy was announced as our CEO on the 1st of January this year. So Chrissy is the fourth CEO in the history of the company, and the third generation of the Taylor family to lead the organisation. And interestingly, Chrissy actually spent some time in the UK, spent several years working over here, so she's very familiar with the UK and the European mobility landscape, which is always helpful. In actual fact, Chrissy was the last person I had a meeting with before we closed down our offices 8 weeks ago. So I got pretty much the last chat with her in Europe on what we were doing about EVs before she flew back to the States just put the lockdown. So many of you will be aware of us from airport operations and hiring vehicles, literally a local branch, a local city branch, at railway stations and airports and things like that. But we also extend beyond sort of private cars. We have a large commercial vehicle operation, which is actually flat out supporting the emergency services at the moment, particularly in the UK, Germany, and France and Spain. We go right up to heavy goods vehicles with temperature control bits and delivery vehicles and things like that. We do servicing, and we also provide flexible, accessible vehicles for those with mobility challenges. We also invest in technology, and mobility is a key part of the organisation. I'll explain a little bit more about that further on, but customer experience is absolutely fundamental to what we do. We're not necessarily the cheapest rental car you will come across when you go to one of our branches, but we pride ourselves on our customer service, and that is generally second to none. And I think for the last 4 years, we've been voted the UK's best rental company in terms of customer service, and it's something we pride ourselves on. But also we support a lot of corporate clients with their own fleets and operate those fleets on behalf of their things, obviously looking at reducing CO2, improving air quality, and just generally giving them options, which is not always a private car. We're quite into a bunch of mobility as a service projects, and unusually for a rental company, we have partnerships with public transport operators in the UK, and we work with bike operators and people like that as well. So perhaps not the side of the business that most people will be familiar with. Autonomous vehicles, we've been working with Waymo in the States for a number of years now, and obviously the electric vehicle technology, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So as well as that side of things, I just wanted to sort of just show you the car club operation. So Enterprises Car Club is now largest in the UK. If you go to London, one of our main competitors is Zipcar, but in terms of geographical coverage, 95% of the UK population are within 10 miles of an Enterprise Car Club vehicle. So it's a remote access thing. You can just reserve that online or make a call, give you a code, and you go off and rent that car by the hour. We're over 2,500 vehicles actually on fleet at the moment, including a bunch of electric vehicles, and that we're keeping that service going during the current pandemic, which has been a bit challenging, as you might expect. So we're having to do clean down between every service at the moment, but we've managed to keep that going, and particularly with making discounts available and providing free access to those vehicles in certain groups of NHS and frontline workers and things like that. Strategically, we've been looking at integrated travel planning for a number of years now. There'll be a couple of names you might have seen on here before, particularly on the right-hand side here with Mobilio. So we're involved in quite a lot of investments in mobility, above and beyond the rental type of operations you might expect. And that's all leading towards this EV transition and innovation side of things that is really my bread and butter, my everyday activity. This is kind of just a slide that shows the predicted market change in electric vehicles and hybrids over the next sort of 10 years or so. Obviously, these were put together before the current pandemic, and things may well change quite significantly over this period of time. But it just shows you the ramp up that's happening at the moment, and clearly, depending on what happens with the stimulus packages attached to perhaps the European Green Deal, we may see a steeper transition over the next couple of years. It's going to be interesting to see what happens on that. We're keeping a very close eye on what's going on there. 5 key factors, though, that we think will drive EV growth, and primarily is that regulation that sits at the top, that's been driven by public health and sort of just climate change things we're all familiar with. And I think when you look at the photographs and statistics showing empty roads at the moment and dramatic improvements in air quality, I think people are going to take notice of that. Whether or not we go back exactly to where we are where we were before the crisis, who knows? Hopefully not. But I think this is one of those moments in time where things could change quite significantly, and we won't necessarily be going back to the old normal. The other side of things is financials. What we've been seeing is EV costs are beginning to fall. They're still quite expensive to buy an electric vehicle in comparison with a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle, but the residuals are improving on those vehicles. And also we're expecting to see regulations which will drive up costs over time for ICE vehicles as well. Manufacturers are beginning to react, and before the pandemic, 2020 was being touted as the year of the EV, when we could see a large number of vehicles being launched. We will see how many actually come to market, but certainly in the UK over the last few months, we've seen a massive increase in the number of EVs, partly due to benefiting common taxation for company vehicles, but certainly people are beginning to sort of think much more clearly about their vehicle choices going forward. And again, post-COVID-19, I think that's going to be something that's a big factor going in. Range anxiety is still something we hear a fair bit about. And charging anxiety is perhaps a little bit more pertinent, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then fiscal incentives, subsidies, bonuses, and reductions, and those kind of things are all part of that sort of package about getting people to think about EVs more clearly. I mentioned range anxiety. We've done some research with fleet managers, and it is that sort of the range of an EV that is quite critical. I drive on EV on a daily basis. One of the things you do have to sort of get used to, particularly in cold weather, is your range can be easily 30% less just due to weather related challenges, and also your driving style as well. So EVs generally tend to be better in an urban landscape, not so good on a motorway or an autoroute or something like that. So even when you get a Model 3 Tesla that'll do 300 miles, a typical diesel is going 600 miles. So quite a challenge from a fleet industry there, but that's allied also to charging anxiety. And there's still a perception that people need to charge up their vehicles as quickly as an ICE vehicle. But some people do have access to home charging. That's quite interesting. But those who have, rely on the public charging infrastructure, you could be there for quite a while. There could be queuing and things like that. People don't really want to sit in for an hour to charge up the vehicle. We're also beginning to see, because of the limited charging infrastructure, this is a particular case in the UK, and it's probably better in Germany, but beginning to get queues at charge points because of the number of company cars that have been coming on the roads in the last few months. And basically, service stations are not really what the sort of destination people want to go to and spend time at. So we have to sort of think about that. And actually, in the UK, there's a company called GridServe who are just beginning to build the first purpose-built EV charging station, which is set out with canopies and lighting and all those kind of things you kind of expect from a normal fuel environment. The other thing is about price transparency. There's a huge difference in price between charging up at home and charging up at some of the public infrastructure, and particularly if you're talking about ultra rapid chargers, which can be about 4 times the price per kilowatt than the home charging scenario. Infrastructure is still a challenge, and we're beginning to see a lot more investment in distribution networks, and that's been backed both at national government levels and from the EU. And again, it'll be interesting to see how much funding goes into that as the Green Deal comes online. The maintenance of the charge points are still a bit challenging in these early days. Again, getting better, but people still have lots of tales about turning up at charge points and not working, or having glitches in the software and things like that. The ability to get those things fixed quite quickly is quite key. 33% of UK households don't have a garage for doing that home charging. So again, the need to charge at work or at office or other destinations is still quite important. Lots of people don't have access to that. But fundamentally, that roaming and standardisation of charge network is a key thing. UK is particularly fragmented, but right across Europe, there is still quite a long way to go towards the roaming infrastructure that we need, sort of things you'd be expecting to have with a mobile phone, for instance. And finally, sort of some of the things about journey profiling. So, we need to talk about the right customer for the right vehicle. So what we're beginning to do a lot more of it is talk to our customers about what the purpose of the trip is, and to understand if that trip is able to be done by an EV. Has it got the right range? Have you got charging infrastructure at your destination, those things. Of course, hybrids have a part to play for that for the time being, but we think those are likely to be a sort of stopgap measure, and certainly the UK government has sort of indicated that by 2032, maybe 2035, that hybrids will probably be off the table. So we are moving towards that full electric. Again, driven by cities in particular, so low emission zones, access restrictions on air quality would be, although some of those have been relaxed under the current situation, we think those are going to get much more stringent going forward, and that's going to push people towards EVs. And again, renting the right vehicle to the right person for the right trip becomes part of that. Taxation, undoubtedly part of those things, but also driver education. One of the key things that even today, we struggle to get people to drive an automatic car rather than a manual. So actually, when you enter an EV, it's a little bit strange, and people don't like change. So we've got a big education piece to do on that. So I think that's my time up. Happy to take some questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think I speak for everyone when I said it was very interesting. We have some questions to you from the audience. One is about the car club. Is it station-based or is it free-floating?
It's station-based. We don't do any free-floating, and actually we've seen less free-floating in the UK recently. Share pulled out of the UK market last month, so we've always provided just the fixed base operation. That actually works really well for our EVs because it guarantees there's a charge point available for the EV when the vehicle comes back.
Brilliant. And another question is, what has been your biggest challenge so far since the beginning of the crisis, and what can you learn from this?
The biggest challenge, I mean, obviously business is not as usual. We've seen a significant drop in airport and leisure rental. Well, significant is almost zero. On the flip side, we've seen a huge increase in demand for delivery trucks and things like that. Again, we've put in a cleaning regime between every vehicle hire. That is expensive. Whether that's tenable in the long term is not really very clear at the moment. But yeah, it's kind of just sort of adapting very quickly to a rapidly changing scenario. It'll be very interesting in the future how vehicle design may change out of this. It's probably too early and too short term to do that. And it's also going to be interesting about how people respond to car use as lockdown restrictions ease and so on. There's quite a lot of discussion online about people avoiding public transit, but for some people, public transit, there is no option because there's no parking or because of the cost of parking, things like that, particularly in urban environments. So it's going to be very interesting how that situation comes about. I think our challenge is to try and show that shared ownership or shared access models of vehicles like we operate is part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. And clearly our fleet is, what I forgot to say is that we buy all our vehicles outright. Typically the vehicle is between 6 months and a year old. So we have the cleanest vehicles out there, whichever the technologies is available. So we have a clean fleet. It's shared mobility to a certain extent. And that's going to be a really interesting discussion as time goes by.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian, for sharing. I will leave some of the questions for the end of our discussion. And let's move now to Angela and hear from IKEA on their contribution to this topic.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. Let's see if we can make this happen, like so. Yes, hello everyone. I'm Angela. I'm with Inca Group, formerly known as IKEA Group. This is just a very quick snapshot of who we are. I'm not going to spend a terrible amount of time telling you about IKEA. We sell home furnishing products. That's basically it. You don't need to know so much more. We operate in 30 countries. I actually took this snapshot from our annual report last year, so we have slightly more stores at the moment. But we also work a lot with sustainability in a lot of ways. We actually own more wind turbines than we do stores today. We have roughly 1 million solar panels. We own a lot of wood. We sell solar panels to our customers in 7 markets and rolling out across all 30 of our markets. We have 16 countries working with refugee programs. We do a lot of work with social entrepreneurships and much, much more. But that's not why I'm here today. Today, I'm here to talk about our efforts in sustainable mobility. I do usually start all my presentations with the same slide. I change the picture sometimes as to not bore people too much. But this is the IKEA vision, and we've had the same vision for more than 75 years now, and it's to create a better everyday life for the many people. Now, this vision takes on slightly different meaning depending on what you work with or when in time you work. For me, it's very simple. If we want to create a better everyday life for the many people, then making sure that people can breathe air that is not toxic seems like a very good start. Already before the corona pandemic, I think it's safe to say that we knew we were in a very unsustainable situation. Urbanization is still going strong, more and more people moving into city centres. We see mobility patterns changing, car ownership declining, shared mobility, as we just heard, on the rise, micro mobility options on the rise, just new solutions and people moving around in ways they haven't really done before. We also see a change in shopping behaviors with our customers, online sales soaring, which means that last mile is also changing, probably changing the most actually. And especially today when we're all at home, we see online sales more or less exploding, and with online sales comes more delivery. But already before that, we saw that demand for last mile services is soaring and expected to grow by 78% by 2030. And basically what this means, of course, is more and more vehicles in the city centres, causing air pollution, noise pollution and congestion. And it's just not a very healthy situation. And I mean, we're not the only ones noticing this. Of course, a lot of local policymakers are seeing the same thing, and a lot of governments are seeing the same thing, that all these vehicles clogging up the city is having a very negative impact. So we also started seeing some bans, especially across Europe, working with low emission zones, ultra low emission zones, congestion charges, and flat out fossil fuel bans, which for us, of course, is something affecting our business. If we cannot access the city centre, then we cannot reach our customers' front doors. If we cannot reach our customers, then we don't have a delivery offer, then we don't have online sales, and then, quite frankly, we go out of business. So for us, it was quite clear that we need to do something differently. And I think today, more than ever, we see that not only is sustainable mobility something we have to do from a climate crisis perspective, from a business risk mitigation perspective, but also from a health perspective. We saw the new study coming from Harvard University quite recently, showing that there is a direct link between air pollution and deaths coming from COVID-19 cases. So air pollution has basically taken a horrible situation and made it so much worse. And it's just, yeah, like Ian just said, we can't go back to the old normal because the old normal was not working. And now more than ever, we need to take this time to really try and make change. This is not the time to ask policymakers to relax emission and regulations. This is the time to really think about what we can do better and come back to a new normal. When we started looking at mobility within Inca, we really started seeing that it affects everything we do. We quickly realized this was not something that was going to be a small project or a one-off, but it really has fundamental impact on all aspects of our business. So it has to do with how we commute. Maybe you noticed in the snapshot in the beginning of the presentation, we have 166,000 co-workers across the world. Now they have to go to work every day, not today necessarily, but in the old normal they did. That has impact. It's how we travel for business. It's of course in what type of services we source, what vehicles we source, how we operate, what we own, what we lease, and what services we offer to our customers. So we quickly realized then that all parts of Inca needed to be active in this, from HR to sourcing to fulfillment, every part really of the business. So we made a few commitments saying that we obviously need to do better than we are doing today. Those commitments are basically can be summed up in these 4 bullets. We said that we would build charging infrastructure in all our touch points, sort of trying to mitigate a bit of the problem that Ian was talking about earlier with the charging anxiety. At least, you know, if you go to an IKEA store, you can charge your vehicles while you're in there shopping or eating meatballs or whatever you're doing. We said that by 2025, we would transform all our home deliveries and make them electric or other zero emission option. That could be a cargo bike, could be something else depending on where technology and innovation will take us. But today there is a clear focus on electric vehicles. If we're going to ask our service providers to perform electric deliveries for us, we should also lead by example and change the fleet we do own to make that electric as well. And then we also want to discuss not only commercial transportation, but also people mobility. So like I said, 166,000 people going to work every day. How can we help our co-workers to get to work in a more sustainable way? Preferably also more convenient and more affordable. One does not exclude the other. They can go very nicely together. And then also engage with our customers across the world and make sure that they can access IKEA in ways that are both affordable, convenient, and sustainable. So that was what we set out to do. And so far, we've had some success. We've had some challenges for sure. And we have quite a few learnings as well. We started trying to take 5 cities and transform last mile deliveries. We thought if we try 5 very different markets, we'll probably gain some learnings that we can then use to scale up across the world. So we picked Shanghai, Amsterdam, Paris, Los Angeles, and New York and said we'll be 100% electric by end of 2020. So Shanghai was the first city where we reached that milestones, and these trucks you can see here in the picture are from our Shanghai operations. It turned out to be a lot easier in China than in many other markets. Some of the key success factors was, well, a very committed team, first of all. That's always a prerequisite. We had a very engaged transport service provider who shared our vision of a more sustainable future and wanted to go on this journey with us. But we also challenged our current ways of working, and we found some new partners. In the case of Shanghai, we work with an EV sharing platform called DST, from which we can access vehicles and charging infrastructure. Now, this was a game changer because we managed to take out a lot of cost of the project. We managed to access vehicles and charging infrastructure much, much faster. Plus, it's a very flexible solution because we can increase the number of vehicles during peak. So it was a very efficient solution for us. But it required from our part too that we were open to finding new ways of working. I think one of the challenges in our industry is that it's very traditional in many ways. Many people still feel that we've been doing deliveries a certain way for a long time, and it's been working quite well, and are maybe not eager to change. So it's about finding those right partners to change with and taking the learnings from other companies and markets that are doing well. For us, for instance, our partnership through EV100 with the Climate Group has been one such forum where we can find other companies who want to go on this journey with us. We also learned quite quickly that the first vehicles are definitely the hardest. It's a lot easier to go from 10 to 50 than to go from 0 to 10 vehicles. So we quickly said that, you know, we should just focus on getting that first electric truck rolling in every market. So today we have deployed electric trucks in 19 out of our 30 markets, with several more in pipeline. And we can see that growth, if we talk growth as in share of deliveries made on electric vehicles, is really exponential here. Once you get the ball rolling, it actually does start to move by itself and you don't have to push quite as hard. But of course, we face the same challenges as everyone else. It's about charging infrastructure, availability of vehicles, the vehicles performing in terms of volume, in terms of range, things like that. But we're also looking into new solutions. It's not going to be as easy as just ripping out combustion engines and putting in electric engines and you know, then we're done. It's going to take some new ways of working. So we're piloting cargo bikes, lockers for customers. We're even doing barge deliveries in Paris now to see if we can get some vehicles off the roads to decrease congestion, and much, much more like that. Charging infrastructure at our stores, which is also one of our commitments, is going quite well. The current pandemic has not had a positive impact on our timeline, if I put it like that. But we do have chargers at most of our stores, more than 80%, and we will reach our target, hopefully by the end of this year, if not as soon as possible. Now, this commitment also goes hand in hand with our commitments in renewable energy. So it's great if we can transform to electric mobility. It's great if we can enable customers to transform. But unless that energy is also clean, we're not going to get all the way. So for us, it's also very important that the power in our chargers comes from green sources. If we take the case of Germany, for example, we have chargers at all 53 of our stores, and they're all powered by renewable energy. And that's what we would like to see at all our stores in the future. We're also looking a lot at commuting solutions for our co-workers. The timeline there has changed slightly as well, of course. This is not the time to ask your co-workers to get in a confined space together and go to workplaces that are closed. But as soon as we get back to some kind of new normal, this is where we want to take. And it's not about telling people what to do, really, but as a retailer and an employer, we need to provide solutions to customers and co-workers. We need to enable them to make these sustainable decisions. And our job is to make that decision as easy as possible by making it the most convenient one and preferably also the most affordable one. Basically, what we see is that we cannot wait. Are the solutions on the market today perfect? No, definitely not. Are the vehicles perfect? No, they're not. Can we wait until we have the perfect options on the market? No, we cannot. We can't wait for innovation to save us. There is already good technology on the market today. There's a lot of companies with brilliant ideas that we should give a chance. So it's about taking the best available solution you can find and then just deploy it. And then we work together to make it better. I think a lot of people view sustainable mobility, both for commercial and for people, as something that is going to happen. I would argue that it's something happening right now. And if you don't get on that train and if you don't come on this journey now, you're sort of going to miss the train and it's going to be too late. So we need to get going right now to make sure that the cities where the majority of people will live are healthy and sustainable, where people can breathe and move. And those two should not be in conflict with each other. It should be a healthy environment for both businesses and people alike. And the only way to do that is to test what we have today and continuously work to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. I think it was very, very interesting. You guys are really doing many different things, and I just have to tell you, I love how you address the coming back to new normal. And we've also had comments from the audience saying that this is really a brilliant approach and we should all think this way. And of course, the sense of urgency, this is something we all have to acknowledge. We know that our house is on fire and it's really important to act now. And just one question for you. What would you say should be done right now collectively from the industry point to really seize the momentum and come back to the new normal with the new rules and with the new approach?
Well, I think first of all, from an industry perspective, we need to think about what not to do. This is not the time to write letters to the European Commission to say, let's relax emission standards, let's postpone emission regulation. It's not the time for that. This is the time to make sure we stay committed to our targets, to our commitments, to a more sustainable future, and make sure that we build, the new economy, so to say, when we come back, on things we actually want, on green technology, that we find those new working opportunities in technology and in areas that are actually sustainable for a long time. We should not fall into the trap of going back to something we perceive as safe, because we already know that everything we were doing before was not working for us, not from a business perspective, not from a people perspective, and definitely not from a climate perspective. So I think this is the time to really see, okay, what are the opportunities we have in coming back better? Because we're going to have to do it.
Absolutely, that's a very powerful message, and let's keep up this work, because we have really noticed the significant improvement in air quality during the crisis. So I think we should all work towards taking an advantage of it. Thank you so much, Angela.
It's probably going to be short-lived, unfortunately, but yeah, well, enjoying our 1955 emission standards in the UK as long as we can.
I'm going to give the floor to Matthias now, who's ready with us now, and he's going to share what Sweco is doing for sustainability.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be part of this discussion, and it's great that we make good use of the time that many of us now have sitting in our homes and planning about what to do once this pandemic is over. In comparison with most other companies, Sweco is a rather large company, but in comparison with the two previous speakers, we are tiny. So So I'm gonna focus mainly on other aspects than of Sweco as a company. Sorry, I got interrupted because I can't see my screen. Well, anyway, we being a tiny company of just 17,000 employees, we have a business in something between 70 and 100 countries at any given time. We have 15 countries that we consider our home markets because we have offices there. Most of them are on the map here, so we're mainly a European player, even though we're also doing great work with climate neutral cities in China and sustainable mobility in India and so much else. So that is about us, and I agree with previous speakers that the most important part here is probably not to speak about who we are, what we do. And I want to focus that mainly on Sweden, actually, backtracking a little bit. And since we're a technical consultancy firm, we do mainly what people ask us for. That might be authorities, which are a large part of our budget and of the work that we do, and also private companies and organizations. But backtracking to Sweden, we are a country that like to think of ourselves as big, but we're not. After the Paris Agreement, the Swedish politicians got together and decided that we needed a modern, in line with the Paris Agreement, climate target as well. And we started out by thinking, okay, so how big a part of the total global climate impact is Sweden's? And many people would have guessed or started guessing up to the tune of several percent, but it's actually 0.15%, a small fraction of 1% of the global emissions. And so there's an eighth party in Swedish politics, which is focusing on other issues, but all the other 7 parties, from the left wing to the right wing parties, they came to the same conclusion. Well, if we're only 0.15% of the global emissions, the only way that we can make a true impact in terms of combating climate change is by being the front runner, being in the lead, being the one that others want to follow, being the permanent global exhibition, if you want, for climate-friendly solutions, being the global climate help desk that other countries and the businesses can turn to. And they then decided on climate targets, which were at the time the toughest in the world. I'm happy to see that there was a global competition where I see that at least probably the Finns have at least some targets that I would say are tougher than ours. But ours is still the best because it's almost the toughest and it's got the widest political acceptance, with 7 out of 8 parties agreeing on Sweden as a climate neutral country by 2045. Incidentally, Sweco, I'll get back to Sweco's climate proposals later. And with a fossil independent transport sector by 2030. Now, what is a fossil independent transport sector? A lot of us would claim that we are probably independent of wine or beer or whatever, but we still have a drink every now and then. So independent is not a very clear definition, and it was put by the same 7 parties after a national commission worked it out for more than a year, that this means a 70% reduction in CO2 equivalents for the whole transport sector between 2010 and 2030. So we're exactly at midway towards this target. And this target has been very important for, I'm sure, companies who are global in presence, but consider Sweden as one of their homes, like IKEA, and certainly for us as Sweco. And this climate target is to be met mainly in 3 different ways. And this is where I ask us all to learn just a little bit of Swedish. Bilen, bränslet och beteendet. The 3 holy B's of the transformation of the transport sector. The bilen is the vehicle, and that's any kind of vehicle, from the tiny kickbikes of Voi, which is Swedish, to the fairly large passenger cars of Volvo, which is Swedish, to the large trucks of Volvo and Scania, also Swedish. And the fuel is very much the electricity that was mentioned by both previous speakers, but not only. And I'm going to get back to why we believe that there's a room for other renewable and sustainable fuels as well. The picture here shows a biogas truck delivering biogas material for biogas production. So the truck runs on the biogas that it produces, and the biogas is done using the banana peels that we would otherwise just throw away and whatever's in the toilet when we flush it. And So the bränslet is sustainable renewable fuels, mainly from leftovers or byproducts. The things that can't be beautiful furniture for IKEA can often be sustainable biofuels. We don't want to waste agricultural land for this, but there's a lot of surplus land and there's a lot of surplus products that can be used. And then thirdly, we've got beteendet, which is the behavioral change, and I'm glad that we are doing exactly that right now. And I believe that it's certainly true, like Angela said just now, that parts of what we are experiencing now is going to go back to normal after the crisis, but parts are not going back. And I believe very many of us are going to see webinars instead of seminars as the new normal. And we're going to be much more reluctant to go to Brussels over a day for negotiations with the Commission. We're going to stay at home and address them much in this way. So bilen, bränslet, and beteendet is the threefold Swedish approach and the Sweco approach to sustainable mobility. And it was interesting when the 7 parties agreed on this. Actually, aviation and shipping was not part of it, but they both raised their hand, both these sectors, and said, count us in. So obviously it's difficult times for the aviation sector now, but the main airlines of Sweden all joined in. And if you travel within Stockholm, where I live myself, between the islands, you will often see electric ferries like this one, which was the world's first high-speed commuter ferry. And both of these parts have helped spur a nascent industry of new players producing electric boats and ferries and electric planes like Heart Aerospace and like Catella, the sort of weird motorboat that's in the picture there, which is above water most of the time to reduce friction. And they all vouch, the newcomers as well as the big manufacturers like Volvo and Scania, that there would be no global business if it weren't for front-runner countries. Even if these countries, in like the case of Sweden, are fairly small, they create a first or front-runner market that will enable others to follow. And one of the reasons that I was not focusing only on electromobility, which is in a country where electricity is by and large renewable and almost carbon-free, and the first choice when you go for new vehicles, is that there's a lot of vehicles already around. In Sweden, there's around 5 million motorized vehicles on the roads, but the new car sales is only in a good year around 300,000, meaning that the vast majority of the problem are fairly new vehicles that we're not going to see scrapped anytime soon, and they're not going to go electric anytime soon. Here we have a 2018 Scania that's probably going to run for 15 more years. We got the car of the year 2018 from Volvo. That's certainly going to be there for many years in the future. And we need to make sure that they run on something that's a lot more sustainable than the fossil fuels that we buy roughly 50% of from Putin's Russia. We want to produce that more sustainable, and we want to move that back home. We don't, as opposed to the Norwegians, we don't have any fossil fuels that we can produce, but we do have the renewable energy for electricity and for sustainable bio energy. As for Sweco, rounding up, we are deciding that we want to be a front runner in each of the home markets that we put forward to you. That is going to mean a different thing in Turkey and Bulgaria, where we're proud to be front runners in climate, and in Sweden, where we have to perhaps struggle a bit even harder to be the front runner, because competition is hard, and because the national target, which we use as guideline for our target, is pretty tough in itself. But we decided that by 2030, in Sweden, we're going to be climate positive, including all 3 scopes of our actions, and actually a part of a scope 4 as well, which I'll get back to. We also decided that by 2023, we're going to have fossil-free transports. That is to a large degree electromobility, but we also include how our employees get to and from work, and there we see biking as a great opportunity, and that's why we help people get company bikes, both to the travel during the day and at the beginning and the end of the day. And also this obviously influences where we put offices and so forth. And of course, in the down hand left corner of my presentation, you see the wonderful working conditions if you choose to go by high-speed train. If you do decide to go by high-speed plane, working conditions are much worse. And that is one of the reasons, apart from climate, that we don't do that when we decide on our own travel at Sweco Sweden. And then coming to the end of my presentation, we see the scope 1, 2, and 3 that we all address, but as a consultancy company, the main emission factor and the most important thing we can do is in our projects with our clients. So when it comes to, for instance, rail and road construction, which we often are the project leaders of, there will often be a CO2 or climate demand for a maximum permissible emission. And we have decided that we are always, in any and all large project, going to be at least 5% better from a CO2 perspective than what is demanded. That might not sound much, but it's a great start, and I can tell you that we haven't seen that from any of our competitors as yet. I welcome them to challenge us on delivering even larger climate gains, but we always will do more than what our customers demand and expect from us. And we also see now that in times of pandemic and staying at home, that many people reach out to us because with 50 offices in Sweden, with offices around Europe, and with offices in India, and many people working in China and elsewhere, it's natural for us to be at the webinar and working from many different places and teaming up in Zoom or Skype or any of these other opportunities. And we see that very many other companies have only recently taken to this and need help and advice on how to be much more climate friendly or climate smart in how they reduce the travel and how they perform better in terms of when they have to travel. So scope 4 is by far the most hard for us to influence because we don't get to decide ourselves. It's the hardest for us to count what was our actual impact, but it's also by far the biggest. And I encourage anyone who has concrete examples on how work in this scope 4 is done and calculated, that would be most appreciated. We don't do sustainability because we want to be seen or are good guys. That might be true, but the most important thing is that we see it as business critical. If we're not a front runner in terms of sustainability and climate, and there we see that transport is the main factor, we see that that's a big threat to our future profitability. We will not have the best employees. We will not be able to work with all the clients that we want to work with. And certainly myself, I would not be interested in being at this company. So it's a vital part of our future. And I believe that's for very many of the businesses listening in. If you're not a front runner in sustainability, that's a big business risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. It was very interesting. I have learned a lot. And Sweco is one of our ERTICO partners that we are very proud to work with and learn from you guys. And I love what you said about sustainability being business critical, because I fully agree with you that if you want to attract the best experts, this is what you have to offer, and there is no question on that. And could you tell us, Matthias, when using gas, how can we make sure that it's a biogas and not fossil-based?
You can make sure that it's renewable fuels in several ways. And in Sweden, what we have a certain percentage of CO2 emissions reductions standards per year for fuels, which means that they have to improve the climate performance of the fuels year by year. And the beauty of it is that it's done in a market economy way. So different companies will choose different ways on how to reach those targets for renewable fuels. In Sweden, biogas is to 92, or gas for vehicles, CNG, is to 92% biogas, usually locally produced, oftentimes because it is a resource that would otherwise just be a costly waste. So it makes business sense, again, to use this waste as a resource for fuel.
Thank you very much. This is why these webinars are ERTICO Academy, because we can all learn from each other and exchange our expertise. And now I would like to invite all the speakers to switch their cameras back on and conclude with some final questions. Perfect. So to conclude, let me just put this on. To conclude, I would like to ask all of you one question, which might be a little bold, but could you tell us what are your climate targets and why should we believe you? Maybe starting with Angela.
Well, our target is to become climate positive by 2030. Why you should believe us? Yeah, we've taken quite a few steps to get there already. We produce more renewable energy than we consume. We measure scope 1, 2, and 3, like Matthias was in. It's important to see the full scope. We believe our fourth scope, so to speak, where we can really make a difference is when we can engage our customers. So it's one thing if IKEA operations are doing great, that's perfect. IKEA has the planetary footprint of a country, actually, somewhere between Switzerland and Denmark. It's even better if we can transform an industry, like we're trying now to work with advocacy and really pushing for more sustainable last mile deliveries. But if we can get our customers to live a more sustainable life at home within the limits of the planet, that's when we can have the biggest impact. But yeah, we've been at it for a few years now, and I think with our investments in wind turbines, solar panels, waste reduction, materials we're using, 100% more sustainable cotton in all our products, all our wood sustainably harvested. I think we have a bit of a track record to show that we mean business, but in the words of our founder, definitely most still remains to be done.
And once we are on the topic with you, there has been some questions for you on how do you manage to decarbonize long distance transport?
So actually, I am not in charge of long distance transport. That's a different company altogether. That's IKEA. What I can say, and you can read more about this in their annual report, is of course we need to focus on alternative fuels, moving away from fossil fuels. It's also about more sustainable fuels in shipping, where IKEA has done a pilot together with one of our shipping suppliers. It's about efficiency, it's about intermodal. There is so much to do in transportation to lower the planetary footprint. And should I also add, there is a huge social aspect to transportation, both last mile and long haul, where we also need to take our responsibility to make sure that everyone in the supply chain is treated fairly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Ian, why should we believe you?
Always a tricky question when you're talking about a rental company. I think the key thing for us is helping our customers on this journey. One of the things we've done over the last few years is a lot of fleet management, and you know, it's not always based on climate. You have to think about the business rationale for undertaking trips and things like that. So we've spent a lot of time in analysing our client data and providing optimal solutions for them. And one of the things that we've been sort of a big challenge over the last couple of years is people moving away from diesel vehicles and moving back towards petrol to a certain extent. And what we're seeing is, you know, decrease in particulates, but a corresponding increase in CO2 emissions. So we're trying to help our customers achieve the right balance and bring down their emissions from that perspective. And obviously, a huge education piece from us about the benefits of EVs and the transition towards that. There is still a huge amount of customer education to do in that. You live in this bubble all the time and you think everybody knows the benefits of zero emission vehicles and things and how they work and things like that. But the reality is we're a very small percentage of people who live in this transportation area, and most people are just not aware of, you know, how these things work and the benefits for everybody going forward. So it's a big challenge. Europe is definitely going to be leading the way on this. I think the Green Deal is going to be absolutely critical for helping make this transition. What we learn in Europe will go back to the States. I think it's fair to say they're a couple of years behind us, with maybe some exceptions on the West Coast. but you know, it's something that we've got to address. And you know, 2 million vehicles globally. You know, we are a significant player in this thing. We can make a significant contribution to making the planet a better place.
Brilliant, thank you. And Matthias, I see you're very eager to answer.
That's true, yes, because exactly today, this afternoon at 3 o'clock, so as we were just gearing up to this conference, we launched the Sweco Sweden Climate Positive 2030 target, which is part of the Sweco Group's decision that in each home market we are to be a front runner, which means that the targets look different for different countries. For instance, Sweco Netherlands, they included also 100% circular by their target year. And some of the countries might even beat Sweden to it. We haven't seen all of them because they're coming in right now. And that's part of the reason why I believe you should believe us, that even in this very difficult times that we're all in, we choose not to step down, but to step up the work that we're doing in terms of climate ambitions, and to have strengthened our climate targets compared to what we had previously, but also because we believe it's business critical. But I think that believing us and believing car rental companies or believing IKEA is not good enough. You need to, with your wallet and where you choose to work and who you choose to support, make sure that there is a strong business case for being a leader in terms of reducing climate impact. If you do see somebody who's even better than Sweco when it comes to climate targets, well, do go and shop there. But if you see and believe that what we're doing is front runner, I would believe that it's best for the climate that there is an active choice from customers, big and small, to support those kinds of initiatives.
Brilliant. So just to conclude, from each of you, could I just hear one step or one call for action for all of us in industry? What should we do right now today to get closer to decarbonization?
If I may start then, I think go home, look at the areas of your business you need to address, look at the problems you have, find the most sustainable, best solution on the market, and then even though it's not perfect, deploy it and then work to make it better. Brilliant,
thank you. Matthias?
Yeah, let me join in on that one. I loved your question, by the way. What can we do today? I love our 2030 targets, and I think it's impressive the country target that Sweden has, but getting started is the key point. And just look around. There's gonna be stuff that can be done easily, and a lot of them are not pains but gains.
Perfect, very powerful message. And Ian?
I think people don't like change, and yet the last 8 weeks have demonstrated that people are very adaptable. So just for individuals, but also for businesses as well, don't be scared. Go and embrace change, because if you don't, you may well become irrelevant in the future economy. There are plenty of people out there who can help you, and just go out and ask. Examine yourself, your business. How can we do things better? And if you don't know how to do it, go and find some help. And there's plenty of people out here in the ERTICO audience who can do that.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for this exciting input. I think we all have learned a lot today, and it's a lot of food for thought for all of us. I believe we all have to work together to achieve what we have to achieve. It's not a question if we need to, we have to. And I would like to thank all of you for your time today, for your contribution, for your brilliant thoughts, and to remind all the participants that this webinar will be available online if you would like to share it with others or rewatch it. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to speak to you again on another exciting topic.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye.